the title of this presentation is going to be Denver Metro and North Front Range Area Compliance with Federal Ozone Standards. And our presenters today are Amanda Brimmer. Amanda is the Technical Director of the Regional Air Quality Council. In this role, Amanda facilitates development of the state implementation plan for ozone for Denver Metro, North Front Range non-attainment areas, as well as managing other air quality planning activities, and also providing technical direction and support for council activities. Prior to joining RAQC, Amanda was a principal air quality planner with the North Central Texas Council of Governments in Arlington, Texas. Amanda graduated from Colorado State University with a bachelor's in mechanical engineering and earned a master's degree in civil environmental engineering from the University of Texas, Arlington. Outside of work, Amanda enjoys hiking, reading, and spending time with her two daughters. So welcome, Amanda. And our second speaker is Jessica Ferko, who is an air quality planner for the Regional Air Quality Council. She has 7 years experience working in the air quality field and uses her experience to perform specialized work in air quality planning, control strategy evaluation, and stakeholder engagement. Prior to joining the team at the RAQC, Jessica worked in consulting, focusing on environmental permitting and air dispersion modeling. Jessica graduated from Kalamazoo College with a degree in chemistry and Michigan State University with a degree in chemical engineering. When not working, Jessica spends time climbing rocks, riding bikes, and watering her garden. So welcome, Jessica. And before we get started, if you don't mind muting yourselves, and then at the end we'll have some time for questions, so you can unmute yourself and ask a question there. But that way we can avoid having some feedback. But again, welcome, Amanda. Welcome, Jessica. And I think, Jessica, you're gonna get us started, right?
I'm going to unmute myself and then hand it over to Amanda to start our presentation.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon. As Sergio mentioned, I'm Amanda Brimmer, Technical Director at the Regional Air Quality Council. And Jessica Ferko and I are going to be tag teaming this presentation today. Just going to give this group some background on who the RAQC is and what we've been working on the last couple of years related to ozone in the Denver Metro North Front Range area. So first slide, please. So the RAQC, we are the lead air quality planning agency for the 9-county region in the Denver Metro North Front Range. We work very closely with local, state, and federal partners, and there are 2 metropolitan planning organizations that fall within our region that we do air quality planning with. So we coordinate with the Denver Regional Council of Governments, which is the 7-county area around the Denver Metro area, and then the North Front Range Metropolitan Planning Organization, which is our northern 2 counties of Brimmer and Weld. So our primary responsibility is planning to meet federal air quality standards. So these are developing plans which are known as SIPs. We're pseudo-local government. We're nonprofit local government, kind of an interesting agency, but we exist via executive order of the governor. So we've been designated by the governor to do this planning for the Denver metro area. Ozone planning for the rest of the state is generally done by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment. We also work on public education programs and public awareness. So we run our Simple Steps Better Air program to help people be more educated and know kind of what those simple actions are that they can do to help reduce ozone and improve air quality in our region. We also get quite a few grants that come through our agency for implementing public and private projects to reduce emissions. So a big focus over the last 30 years or so that we have existed has been working on clean vehicle projects. So working with local governments and fleets to convert their vehicles or purchase new, cleaner vehicles, generally alt fuels. And now there's a big focus on going electric, both electric vehicles and helping with installing charging infrastructure. And then we also just work closely with the local governments through the air quality planning process. So, as there are questions or needs or data needs in the air quality planning, particularly related to ozone, we partner a lot with local agencies there. Next slide, please. So of the air quality standards, the law, EPA requires that the standards be set at levels necessary to protect public health and welfare. This does not mean a 0 level of risk but it's based on science. And so for those that are familiar with the National Ambient Air Quality Standards, at least particularly for ozone, this has been, or the standard has been ratcheted down quite a bit over the last several decades. So, there's a misconception out there lots of times that, air quality keeps getting worse. And that's not really the case. It's more that the standard gets tighter. So as we make progress reducing ozone, there end up being more studies that come out saying that ozone levels need to be even lower. So it's chasing this ever-moving target. But we are seeing ozone levels coming down based on what's going on with emission reductions. But again, we have to meet those standards based on what EPA sets. Under Federal Clean Air Act, cost cannot be considered in determining the level of the standard. However, in determining what emission reduction strategies are to be implemented if you are a non-attainment, cost is generally a factor in that. It really depends on what level you're at, on how much you can incorporate cost. Sometimes it's reasonable cost, sometimes it's best available technology, irrespective of cost. But in setting it, it needs to be based on the science. And then, there is modeling that is done in developing a plan, but ultimately the test of attainment is whether or not your monitoring values are meeting the standard. So these are really two different parts of the Clean Air Act and ozone planning that we are constantly involved in, is developing the plans that are required by the Act, and then also, keeping an eye on what the monitors are saying and whether or not we've actually met that standard. So next slide, please. So these are the 6 criteria pollutants in the Clean Air Act. We have been attaining the top 4 since they were enacted: carbon monoxide and coarse particulates, or PM10. The region was a non-attainment back in the 80s and 90s, but has since attained. And so ozone has really been the one that we have struggled with. So we're currently on the 4th iteration of the ozone standard, which is a 2015 standard. Previously, as a tighter standard came online, EPA was revoking the older standard. When they did this, revoked the 1997 standard. When the 2008 standard came online, that was challenged in court, and it was determined that EPA could not revoke the 2008 standard for areas that had not yet attained that when the new 2015 standard came online. So for our region, since we have not attained the 2008 standard or the 2015, we're actually doing parallel planning right now. So working to attain both of these standards based on the deadlines outlined in the Clean Air Act, based on when we are designated for these. Next slide, please. Oh, and this standard, the 2008, is what our SIP is on right now that we are working on, and that we'll walk you all through today. So ozone, I'm sure many people on this call are familiar with it, but for those that are not, the 2 primary precursors to ozone are volatile organic compounds and nitrogen oxides. Generally, VOCs are going to be those pollutants that you can smell, so paint, gasoline, other plants that smell really good, those are going to be your VOCs. And then NOx comes from combustion, so that's going to be coming out of a tailpipe or a smokestack. They come from many different sources. You have the smaller area sources like dry cleaners, you have on-road vehicles, you have your off-road equipment, so construction equipment, ag equipment, aircraft, locomotives. Point sources, so your bigger stationary sources, and then you also have just biogenics. We live in Colorado, so we have quite a bit of natural emissions of VOCs coming from trees, and then also when there are forest fires, that also increases emissions of these as well. So lots of areas to focus on for emission reductions. Some are easier to target than others. Next slide, please. So 2020 is a really big year for the region. This was a critical year for us for both the 2008 and the 2015 ozone standards. If we were not able to attain either of those, we are facing reclassification, so going up to a higher classification, which has more stringent requirements for controlling emissions. And it's based on a 3-year average is how they determine attainment. So 2018 was a pretty rough year for the region. 2019 was a bit better. So we were hoping 2020 would be decent, so that 3-year average would get us right at 75 or below. You know, we're not close to 70, but 75 is really what we've been focusing on trying to attain by this summer. So things were going pretty decent through early July. We were seeing activity down quite a bit in spring due to COVID, unfortunately. That's not a control strategy that we really want to adopt at all. But we were seeing emission reductions, you know, into the summer. And so fingers were crossed in July that, you know, maybe we might make it. And then we had some fires, not a whole lot yet, but starting mid-July, next, can you advance, Jessica? This is an animation that's kind of hard to do advancing. We ended up exceeding the standard as of the middle of July. So we were at 78 and 77 at 2 of our monitors. So, you know, there's one provision in the Clean Air Act that if in your last year, if in 2020, all of our monitors are at or below the standard, we could potentially get an extension on our attainment deadline. But unfortunately, we did have one monitor, which is the NREL monitor, which was sitting at 78 as of mid-July. So that really makes us no longer in the running for an extension. We were hoping the 3-year average could maybe get us there, but it also couldn't. And it's not super clear whether or not we could do some analysis to pull out some of those days that happened in July due to wildfires. There's a provision in the Clean Air Act that if you can show that wildfires or stratospheric ozone was the cause of exceeding that day, you can potentially do a demonstration and pull those out of your annual data and thus your 3-year average. So some are really clear cut, some not so much. The ones in early July aren't quite as clean as whether or not that we would be able to do a demonstration there. And then the end of July and August, thank you, Jessica, and next one, we had a bunch of wildfires in our state and also outside of our state. And with all of those, that really caused us to have very high levels. This is actually, you know, some of the highest ozone levels we've seen in the last several decades. So we were up to 87 for our 4th max for 2020. Our 3-year design value was 81. And so while we could potentially do a bunch of exceptional events, this would be a lot of work to try to show that we still attained the standard, but, you know, these wildfires really skewed our numbers this year. So next slide, please. So this is showing the severity of the days, how many days we've had that exceed the 75 standard versus days that exceed the 70 standard, and how many ozone alert days. So, you know, it really is cyclic, as we see throughout the years. Some years are higher ozone, some years, you know, not as much ozone. And a lot of this is very dependent on meteorology. So cooler, wetter summers, we tend to see fewer ozone days, and then dry, hot summers like this year, we see more days. So we had quite a few ozone alerts this year. Not as many of those turned into exceedances, but you know, it wasn't enough. We had enough orange days that it didn't get us to attainment in 2020, unfortunately. Next slide, please. And so this is showing where those key monitors are. So we have 15 monitors in our region, and our key monitors that tend to be the ones that exceed most often and that are our focus in planning are Chatfield, State Park, NREL, Rocky Flats, and Fort Collins West. And you know, this doesn't really show the topography of the area, but for those that are familiar with where our counties sit, you know, these monitors are really close to the mountains or the foothills. And so that's one of our challenges here in the region is, you know, we get, you know, air moving from the mountains to the plains in the morning, and then in the afternoon it shifts direction and starts pushing those emissions back up towards the foothills. And then in the sunlight and heat, it really cooks and causes those to be our highest monitors generally. So, you know, we have a lot working against us, just because of being high altitude, you know, because of our topography. So it is quite a challenge in our region to get our numbers down. But, you know, we have been seeing progress, but again, you get a year like this year with forest fires and it's really hard and starts skewing those numbers. Next slide. And this is, you know, it's been a bit of bad news up until this point, but I did at least want to highlight that, as we all know, the region is growing a whole lot, and so the yellow line on here is showing daily vehicle miles traveled, and so we continue to see that increasing. People are driving more. The green line is population, so we have more people moving to this region. And then this dark blue line is oil and gas production. We've seen that just take off over the last decade or so. But while all of that is happening, we're actually seeing a really significant reduction in VOC and NOx emissions. So the light blue line is our daily VOC emissions. The red line is daily NOx. So as we're seeing more activity, we are doing a pretty good job actually in controlling these emissions that are happening from all of this activity. Unfortunately, it's not having as steep of an impact on our ozone values. So you can see the orange values up there. It's kind of going back and forth between upper 70s, lower 80s throughout the year. We've been making about half ppb progress per year for the last 5 or 6 years, and then these forest fires that we kind of lost some of that progress, but we are still seeing a slight downward trend. Again, we would like to see it more on the trajectory of these emission reductions, but ozone is just very complicated chemistry, and so it's not always a one-for-one relationship between a ton reduced and a ppb of ozone or so. Next slide, please. So kind of pulling this all together, big picture, what this really means, where we're at. The blue boxes, that is the 2008 standard, and where each of the designations falls. And then the green boxes are the 2015 standard. So again, 2020 was a critical year for us. We were trying to get to 70. That's really our ultimate goal, is getting down to 70. We are currently classified as serious for the 2008 standard and marginal for the 2015 standard. And I know this kind of sounds counterintuitive, that we would be a less stringent classification for a tighter standard, but this really has to do with the date at which we were classified. And so we have been out of attainment with the 2008 standard for that much longer. I'm not seeing the slides anymore. Is it on my end?
I cannot see them either.
There we go.
Now? Sorry, I just got a notification someone else started sharing, but I think we should be good now.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. We're back in business. We can see throughout the years back through the late 90s how we are seeing a downward trend, but that slope really is not getting us down to the blue or even the green boxes right now. So we do have a lot more work to get down into, or to be able to meet the standard, hopefully in the next 3 years. Next slide. So this is, just basically what I was talking about with the different years to attain, and why we would be a different, lighter, lesser classification under a tighter standard, and how many years from that date of designation areas have to attain. And these are really all prescribed by the Clean Air Act, so there's not a whole lot of wiggle room here on when these are triggered. Next slide, please. Once again, just showing where we are with both standards, trying to plan for both of these, doing a serious and marginal SIP right now in 2020. And so Jessica and I are going to walk through the various elements and chapters in this serious SIP that is being developed that has been developed and is going through the Air Quality Control Commission right now for a public hearing for approval at the end of this year. And if we are not able to attain, we are facing a reclassification to potentially severe under the 2008 standard and moderate under the 2015 standard. So there would be another probably dual SIP, trying to conserve resources and doing as much joint work as we can, submitting a SIP that addresses both of those standards in 2022. So next slide. So just, pretty quick, going through what it means to be a moderate area versus a serious area. The biggest thing is future year, what year you have to attain. So when you get reclassified, you get generally three more years to attain, but you have more requirements placed on you. So there's a thing called reasonable further progress. And so this is, we have to do an attainment demonstration modeling, which is saying, using photochemical modeling, showing that emission reductions will get us to attainment. And so that's a modeling piece, but then we also have to actually show emissions inventories, and they're showing that our emission inventory continues to go down, that we are continuing to reduce emissions tons per day in the summer towards meeting that goal. The other really big change from going from moderate to serious is what is considered a major source. So sources of NOx or VOC that were 100 tons per year or more were considered major source when we were a moderate area. Now it's 50 ton per year sources of NOx or VOC. And this went into effect early 2020. So we went from having about 50 to 60 major sources in our non-attainment area to now having more like 500 to 600 sources that are considered major source, with I think over 90% of those sources are oil and gas sources. And if we do get reclassified to an even tighter classification, that goes down to 25 ton per year sources. So that's adding even more that are going to have to go through Title V permitting and that whole process. We have to look at reasonably available control measures. This is analysis we always do of what we can implement that makes sense to help us get to attainment. We have to have an inspection and maintenance program. We already have an enhanced program back from when we were in non-attainment for carbon monoxide, so we've already met that. That's pretty simple. New source review and RACT. Jessica's going to go through that in a little bit. We do have to do contingency measures. So in the event we don't attain, we have to have measures automatically go in place that are going to get us additional reductions. We have to set emission budgets for transportation conformity. And then these last two are new requirements for being serious. One is Clean Fuel Fleet Program, which is saying fleets of over 10 vehicles need to have a certain percent that are all fuels. And then transportation control is really transportation conformity, which we already do. So it's just a testing that our transportation plans do conform with the SIP and that they're not adversely impacting our ability to attain the standard. Next slide, please. So we have an ozone monitoring network, again, 15 stations operated by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, their Air Pollution Control Division. And then 2 of them are run in Rocky Mountain National Park. One's run by the Park Service and one is run by EPA. There are a lot of other monitors in our region that monitor not the whole slate of pollutants that these ones do, but those are not regulatory monitors. They're more for research. And so, other monitors can have a lot of good information, but as far as what is actually the test of attainment and what we are, what we are held to and what is the data that actually determines whether or not we attain, these are the monitors that we're looking at data for. And again, each of these needs to be at or below the standard for the whole region to be in compliance with the standard. Next slide, please. So one of the elements of this state implementation plan for Sirius is developing emission inventories. And so for the 2008 NAAQS, 2011 is the base year inventory. And so this is what percent reduction requirements are based on, is looking at your 2011 inventory and then how much you're reducing from there. So 2017 was our last attainment year in our last plan. 2020 is the attainment year in this current plan that's going through the commission for approval. And you can see the blue is our VOC inventory of the last 9 years, and red is our NOx inventory. And so you can see we've reduced almost 50% of both NOx and VOC, and a lot of this being, both federal measures coming down, so cleaner engine standards, cleaner fuel standards, but then also a lot of reductions coming from regulations within the state. Particularly in the oil and gas sector, some of the regulations from 2014 reducing VOC emissions has resulted in a really big reduction in that portion of the inventory. So again, we're making a lot of progress. I mean, this is a success story of how much we've been able to reduce just in the last 9 years. But again, it's not quite getting us there. So we're still continuing to look at where else can we cut to really get ozone down to where it needs to be. Next slide, please. So this is looking specifically at the VOC inventory. This is the requirement for reasonable further progress. We have to show a 9% reduction between 2017 and 2020. again, based on 2011 inventory. So for our last plan, we had to reduce the amount that's in that red box. So 78 tons was our goal. But with everything else we had going on, we actually were able to exceed that by quite a bit with that purple box. So we had additional reductions beyond what was required. And now in this plan, we're looking at the column in the far right. The green box was additional reductions that we had to show, so 47 tons. And then we exceeded that again this time with everything that's being done and implemented in the state with an additional 14 tons reduced between those years. So, we're doing a good job. We're meeting this requirement, but again, more needs to be done to ultimately get to attainment. Next slide, please. So again, attainment demonstration modeling, this is really a big interest, a big part of this state implementation plan. And it's demonstrating based on, known emission reductions that are going to happen in your attainment year. Is it likely that the region will demonstrate attainment? And so I believe Ralph Morris is on the line here from Ramble. They've done a lot of this, well, they've done all of this modeling for us for the past SIP as well as this SIP. And, this is based off of EPA's modeling platform, their 2016 platform. So this is a new platform for us. EPA's platform only goes down to 12 kilometers, but we go down to 4 simply because of the terrain here with the mountains and very, rugged terrain in our area. 4-kilometer modeling just makes a lot more sense to be able to get a lot more details and see the impact of emission reductions. And so one of the things I want to point out with modeling that is also kind of a misnomer, it's not really trying to predict the future and what's going to happen in our attainment year. It's testing the impact of the emission reductions that are on the books or on the way. So in this modeling, we develop a 2016 base year. We put in 2016 meteorology. We put in emissions that we know were occurring in 2016, and we try to get the model to perform as best as we can compared to what actually happened in 2016. And then the test is pulling out 2016 emissions and plugging in what we anticipate the emissions to be in 2020 and see how the model, how it reacts to that, what differences we see. So, 2020 was not exactly like 2016. There was really no way to factor in COVID prior to, COVID happening. So, just want folks to keep in mind that, none of that could have been anticipated, and 2020 wasn't exactly like 2016. So our modeling results are going to be different than what actually happened in 2020. So next slide, please. So as far as what we can include for emission reductions in the plan, we can only include what is already happening and enforceable. So there are, federal standards, state and federal programs, all these rules that we can take credit for. Anything else that's voluntary, we are not able to take credit for per se in a SIP, but it doesn't mean that it's not having real world impacts. So next slide. So this was our base year design value. This was trying to simulate what happened in 2016. So again, we have these 3, sometimes 4. Fort Collins West is sometimes exceeding. It's usually right on the cusp, but Chatfield, Rocky Flats North, and NREL are key monitors that are usually the ones that are going to make us out of attainment if any of our monitors are going to do that. So we're starting out with our base model at 79 at NREL, 77 at Chatfield and NREL. And then so I guess next slide. Thank you. We had a couple different versions. One of the great things in this modeling exercise was that we were able to do multiple iterations of the model, changing out just one thing at a time instead of having just, a starting model and then changing all of it and seeing how it performed. Ramble went through 10 different generations or iterations of this model, pulling out different pieces, pulling out this inventory, swapping out that meteorology. Biogenics was changed here and there. So we could really pinpoint what was impacting the model performance and where we may need to go in and tweak or take a deeper dive. So, this model, S9 and S10 were the final versions, with S10 being what is in our state implementation plan. And this model actually is performing really well compared to previous models that we've had. This one is doing a pretty good job in predicting what ozone was in 2016. I mean, no model is perfect, and there are, I guess there's guidance as far as how much error can be in a model, and this is definitely within the tolerance of that. So we're really happy with how this model has been performing for this effort here. And so with that good performance, next slide, please. We have been able to demonstrate attainment at all of our monitors, even those key 4 that have been problem monitors. We were able to get at or below the standard, and because of truncation, 75.9, that truncates to 75, and so we are able to show at NREL we are meeting the standard. Unfortunately, these 4 monitors still are modeled to exceed the 70 standard, so we're not quite there yet, but we're continuing efforts to try to determine what strategies are going to get us down to 70. That's our next effort. Once this serious SIP has been approved and submitted to EPA, our focus becomes that 70 standard and how do we attain that. So next slide, please. So this is just going through some technical, talking about bias in the model again and what the performance standards are. And one of the key things that we look for in a model is how many of the actual high days that happened that year is the model picking up. And so this model is actually picking up quite a few of those high days, which is it's great to see. In the last model, I don't think it had nearly as many high days being picked up. So we're really comfortable with this model, and it's great to be able to show attainment with just what is on the books right now. But beyond that, next slide, please. Beyond just showing modeling that we anticipate that the models will show attainment, another piece of this demonstration is what is referred to as weight of evidence. And so this is beyond modeling, beyond what we know is going to happen. All these other things also are going to contribute to ozone in the future. And so we look at, if we pulled out exceptional events, if we pull out days that aren't performing as well as others, what if we correct for weather? I don't want to go into this one, but this is a very interesting analysis. So, if anyone's interested to look at the technical support document on weather corrected trends, this is really interesting, trying to pull out that variance of, wet, dry, hot, cool, and seeing, if we could correct for that, what's happening. And we do see a stronger, steeper downward trend in ozone when we're able to pull that variable out. Also looking at just trends in emissions and other measures that are being implemented that we just can't take credit for. And so all of this can be in a plan as just additional reasons why we think we'll be able to attain by the attainment year. Next slide, please. Emission budgets. This is what the metropolitan planning organizations have to show compliance with in their conformity analyses. And so we generally set this based on the mobile source emissions inventory. So previously we set it at 2017 levels. Now we're setting it at 2020. And really what this means is transportation plans cannot have any additional projects in there that are going to cause emissions to go up and exceed that budget. If they do exceed the budget, then there's potential for, sanctions, for, other issues can happen that would cause transportation funding to be cut off or just delayed if they're not able to meet their budget. So this is a really important piece that's, that we do in each of these SIPs, and we work very closely with the MPOs and making sure we get this piece right. Next slide, please. So again, we have 2 sub areas for these budgets. We set both a budget for the whole region as well as separate budgets for the north and south. And this just helps the 2 areas stay on their own schedule if they need to with doing conformity. But in the event they can't demonstrate conformity, they can combine their efforts and show that the region stays below the budget as a whole if they need to. Next slide. So these are the budgets right now. You know, they continue to go down. I'm just going to skip to the next slide. This shows it a bit better. So the downward trends in blue and red, those are VOC and NOx inventories, as well as where our budgets have been set over the last several years or so. So we've really, you know, cut mobile sources almost in half for both NOx and VOC, and emissions continue to go down into the future. And at the same time, vehicle miles traveled is projected to continue to go up. So, you know, this is also a success story for sure, that we, you know, while we have more people and more miles traveled, emissions continue to go down. And as more of our fleet gets turned over to electric vehicles, these emissions should be going down more and more. So skip through this one, please. Thank you. So the Clean Fuel Fleet Program, again, as I mentioned, in the Clean Air Act, any fleet over 10 vehicles needs to have a certain percent that's alt fuels. This is an artifact from the 1990 Clean Air Act, and a lot of work has been done on mobile sources since then. So in 2016, EPA noted that the Clean Fuel Fleet Program standards have really been superseded by newer, more stringent standards. So Tier 2 vehicles started coming out in 2004. Now we're at Tier 3 and tighter. And so really all new cars that are coming out right now exceed this standard. So there's not really anything that needs to be done additional in our region. EPA has proposed potentially requiring a zero emission vehicle component in this sort of program. And because Colorado did adopt Reg 20 back in 2019, we are well positioned to show that we do meet this requirement as well if EPA determines that we need to add that into our plan. Next slide. Just one more success story. Just wanted to show folks again, NOx and VOC based on model year of vehicle. So, you know, we see a bit of an increase kind of in the early 2000s, but since then we start seeing a decrease year after year, even though population, which is the green line, continues to go up, and then daily miles traveled continues to go up. And, you know, this is a good thing to see that, you know, more miles are being put on our cleaner vehicles and fewer miles on our dirtier vehicles. And again, as we get that fleet turnover to happen with those 90s and early 2000s vehicles, we're going to hopefully continue to see emissions go down in the sector even more into the future. Next slide. I won't touch on our I&M program. Not much to say there. Next slide. And contingency measures, this is one other requirement that we have to do if we don't attain. And so in this piece of our SIP, we were able to take credit for continued emission reductions from federal measures with our on-road vehicle fleet. So as that continues to go down, we will continue to see emission reductions here as part of this requirement. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jessica and let her talk to you about the stationary sources part of this and emission reasonably available control measures analysis as well.
All right. So as Amanda said, I'm going to go over some of the other aspects of our SIP plan, the first being the RACT analysis. So reasonably available control technology, or RACT, is the lowest emission limitation that a particular source is capable of meeting by the application of control technology that is reasonably available considering technological and economic feasibility, which is a mouthful. But there are two avenues for considering RACT. Either source-specific RACT that is established through permitting, or categorical RACT that is established through broader guidance. Non-attainment areas that are classified as moderate or higher must meet RACT requirements for major stationary sources. So as Amanda mentioned earlier, as a serious non-attainment area, our new definition of a major source are any of those that emit 50 tons per year of NOx or VOC. So SIP plans must contain the adopted RACT regulations that include the appropriate control technique guidelines, or CTGs, which are documents that describe EPA recommendations on controlling VOC emissions from set categories of sources. And they also need to include existing provisions that are still considered RACT and negative declarations for CTGs that apply to sources that don't operate in your non-attainment area. So for example, there's a control technique guideline for fiberglass manufacturing of boats. That's not something we do here in the Denver Metro North Front Range. So it's not applicable, and our SIP includes a negative declaration to that effect. In adopting CTGs for VOC source categories and developing RACT for major sources, the state also must consider various aspects, including other current EPA guidances, current economic and technological feasibility, and any other additional information that's available and relevant for the sources that they're trying to control. So information provided by source operators, other studies, et cetera, et cetera. Finally, it is required in the RACT, for that RACT adopted in the SIP be in place by July 20th, 2021. So that's the deadline for sources to meet the RACT standards. So with this SIP effort, the state had to assess 630 different sources that are now considered to be major under that 50 ton per year threshold. This included 590 oil and gas facilities, as well as all the other sources that you see here on this slide. Major sources of VOC are those that you see in blue, and major sources of NOx are those that you see in red. So you can kind of tell there's a wide variety of different operations that RACT had to be considered and developed for. Going on, we have the non-attainment new source review permitting program and the changes to that. So as we mentioned, becoming serious meant our threshold for major sources became 50 tons per year or more of NOx and VOC, as well as the definition of a major modification to a facility or a source is a change that increases emissions by 25 tons per year of NOx or VOC. So these sources that are now major or going through what is now a major modification are required to attain Title V permits. And additionally, they are required to offset emission increases by a ratio of 1.2 to 1. So for each ton of VOC or NOx that the source will generate, that will need to be offset by a reduction of 1.2 tons through buying credits through an emission bank or through reducing emissions from other sources in the non-attainment area. So the next section we have here is the reasonably available control measures analysis, which is different than the reasonably available control technologies. For a measure to be considered RECM, it needs to meet these 5 evaluation criteria. It has to be a strategy that is necessary for achieving attainment, meaning it has to be a viable strategy that does directly contribute to the reduction of ozone in the area and helps the area meet its attainment goals. It has to be technologically and economically feasible, meaning that the strategy has to be implemented with resources that are available at the time, and it has to be able to be implemented. The third is that it has to have been successfully implemented in another serious non-attainment area. So if it's a strategy that has been implemented elsewhere, we need to know that that strategy actually demonstrated that it could reduce emissions and contribute to attainment. If it turned out that that strategy didn't have real world benefits, or if it was not SIP approvable, that's no longer considered RACM. Next, it has to be implemented in time for the ozone season. So for our purposes, that means it had to be in place by the start of the 2020 summer ozone season. So if it's something that's not going to start showing reductions until 2022, that's not considered RACM for the purposes of our SIP. And finally, it has to qualify for inclusion in the SIP, meaning it has to be quantifiable, enforceable, permanent, and surplus. So the meaning we have to be able to calculate the actual emissions benefit from the strategy. We have to be able to enforce that strategy. It has to stay in place, and it can't be a substitute for any other type of mandatory emissions reductions required by the SIP. So in developing this, we looked at a wide variety of different strategies across various sources, including oil and gas, mobile sources, transportation and land use policies, local government regulations, and different outreach strategies. For the purposes of this SIP, however, none of the strategies that we looked at were identified as RACM, either due to the lack of enforceability and not being able to directly quantify the emissions or due to the timing limitations of this SIP. To speak a little more, on our future planning efforts and strategy evaluations. The RACT is continuing to evaluate a wide variety of strategies for implementation in the non-attainment area in the near and far future, as well as strategies that might possibly be included in future SIPs. We're doing this work through one overarching control strategy committee, which is made up of board members, area stakeholders, and members of the public. And all of y'all are invited to attend and provide your input to any of our future meetings. And we also currently have 3 subgroups that are doing more detailed work and developing strategies that have been identified as heavier lifts that will take longer time and a lot more engagement. These include an employer-based trip reduction work group, which is looking at different trip reduction strategies based on commuting options. Vehicle inspection and maintenance and fuels formulations work group, which is looking at strategies like around mobile sources, so different IM programs that we could implement and different fuel-based strategies that can be used in the area. And finally, we have our Clean Air Fund work group, and that's basically looking for a way to bankroll strategies that we've identified as viable, but don't currently have a way to fund, or strategies that we already have in place, but would like to grow if we had access to more money to do so. Information for meeting registration and meeting times is available on the bottom of these slides here. And you'll also find a comprehensive list of strategies that we're working on and the associated research summaries that we've put together for them. So again, please feel free to sign up for email notifications and reach out after the meeting if you're interested in becoming part of that effort. So now taking a kind of a step back and pivoting away from the contents of the SIP and looking at where we are in our serious SIP process. RACT staff began presenting the various elements of the SIP back in January at our monthly board meetings. And we did that from January until June. It took us about 6 months to roll all that information out to everybody. And in August, the RACT board endorsed the SIP, and now we are in the AQCC kind of rulemaking process. We had a request for rulemaking hearing last month in September, and right now we are in the stakeholder process where the different parties are able to review the documents, provide their input, and kind of make refinements on that. And we are scheduled for the full hearing in December. And pending AQCC approval of the SIP, it will be sent forth to the legislature in January 2021 for approval by them, and then on to the EPA for their review in February. So circling back now to the ozone planning timeline that Amanda showed you at the beginning, we can see there's a lot that we're trying to keep track of right now. Let's see if that animation goes. So right now we are at the end of our attainment years for the serious and marginal SIPs for the 75 and 70 part per billion standards respectively, and are hitting our attainment deadlines and are getting our SIPs in. So right now we are at the end of our attainment period based on the 2018 through 2020 monitoring data for the serious and marginal SIPs, and in the process of submitting those. And assuming we do not attain, which as Amanda discussed does look like a likely possibility, we are facing reclassification to severe under the 75 parts per billion standard and moderate under the 70 part per billion standard. And that reclassification would be expected in 2022, with the next round of SIPs being submitted in 2023. So looking forward to 2023, and as part of our continued air quality planning efforts, we've developed some preliminary 2023 modeling forecast. The modeling incorporates measures that are on the books and on the way, so things that we are planning on seeing happen between 2020 and 2023 without any further action. So assuming no additional control measures are added, we're looking to attain the 75 parts per billion standard, but we definitely still have some work to do at our key monitors of Chatfield and NREL. So with that, I'll take another moment to plug our control strategy committee so we can get as more voices involved in advancing bold strategies that will help us meet these goals by 2023. And with that, I want to take some time and see if Amanda has anything else she'd like to add. And I believe our Executive Director, Mike Silverstein, might also be on the line, and wanted to give him a chance to say anything else that he might have.
Yeah, I think you did a great job wrapping that up, Jessica. And Just be happy to take any questions, and yeah, if Mike has anything to say, go for it.
Hello, everyone. This is Mike Silverstein, and I do not have anything to add. Great presentation, guys. Thanks.
Thanks.
Yes, and I agree. It was a great presentation. I'll kick off the first question, and then other people can feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, or you can also send them through the chat. As we're looking at this severe non-attainment, what are some mitigation strategies that maybe had been identified either through modeling or other sources that we could expect to see here in the next few years to be implemented?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. You know, as you saw with our inventory, we've had a lot of reductions happening over the years, but we still have some big source categories. So again, mobile sources is going to be a big focus. It continues to be. You know, a lot of those are federal measures. We can't do a whole lot with engine standards. You know, that's preemptive. We can't touch those, but we can do more behavioral stuff. So getting people to get out of their cars, you know, telework, take transit. I know oil and gas continues to be looked at for additional reductions there. And that's been a big focus of the state, is what more can we do with oil and gas? You know, some of oil and gas has been focused on reducing VOCs, and to be able to do that, you really have to increase line pressure, which requires engines, and engines have NOx. So there's been a bit of a disbenefit on, we're seeing NOx increase kind of as an unintended consequence of controlling VOCs. So that's also another focus. And then you have, you know, lots of non-road engines. Those have been harder to control. And so there's a big focus on how do you address those? You know, the state is going through, they've been developing the greenhouse gas roadmap for focusing more on climate change. But a lot of the strategies are very similar. So one of the things they're looking at is an indirect source rule. And that's looking at any, you know, any place, any business that has a lot of traffic, trying to offset that traffic. Also looking at when they're building that development, you know, trying to reduce emissions from the construction equipment at that place. So, you know, there's some strategies that we've been doing and could do more if we had more money. So, you know, one piece is funding. How do you fund all this? And some of it is putting that additional funding into what we know already works, and then, yeah, looking at other strategies as well. And if we do go severe and tightening major source down to 25 tons, you know, again, they're all going to have to do a RACT analysis and make sure they're implementing the tightest controls that they're able to. So.
Excellent. I was muted. Thank you for that. Yeah, I know it's a difficult question, and I think there are no easy answers, right? Like, so it's just interesting to see what other strategies have been implemented or are in the works.
Yeah, and we have about a list of about 25 that we're currently fleshing out for funding through, as Jessica mentioned, our control strategy committees. And then there's some other big ones, you know, looking at potential changing fuels. That's a pretty big lift, but that could get us some reductions as well. So, you know, if you want the whole list, come to our website, come to our meetings, and you can learn all about what we're looking at. And, you know, any other ideas we'd love to hear as well. So.
Yeah, thank you. Anyone else has any other questions? Bruce, I see you're raising your hand.
Yes, I actually have a whole list of questions, but let me just start with the first one because they're related. I think I remember hearing you say that you have not looked at the impact of regional forest fires on the monitoring data. So I'm wondering if you're going to undertake that and whether you think that would change designations, and also related to that is the issue of background concentrations, and how much do you believe the background concentrations contribute to the monitoring data?
Yeah, so as far as forest fires go, you know, don't want to use a double negative that we haven't not looked at it. But that's really the division. So the state is looking at that. We just don't have a definitive answer on whether or not that will make a difference in attainment. I think there are definitely some clear-cut days that are easy exceptional events. Yes, we wouldn't have had ozone, even in the 50s or 60s if it wasn't for forest fires. But as far as how many exceptional events we would have to do in order to change whether or not we attained, that is what's still being looked at. If it's a couple exceptional events that are easy, that seems like a pretty easy answer. If it's 45 different exceptional events and they may or may not actually get us there, I mean, that's a tougher sell, just with the amount of time that we have and the lift that it would be for the health department to try to do all those demonstrations. So as far as background goes, I mean, this continues to be something that EPA is interested in. We've been looking at it as well. It's not a really, I mean, it's a pretty complicated discussion. It's also fairly political as well. As far as some modeling we did years ago, it showed that around 25% of the ozone in our area is actually controllable by local sources. So 75% is coming in, either ozone coming in or emissions coming in from other areas causing ozone here. I'd say from specifically Canada and Mexico, it's only a ppb or so, if that. It's easier for areas that are on the border to point, right over the line in Mexico. There's a specific facility that is impacting our ozone. So, we can't control that. In Colorado, because we're in the middle of the country, it's a lot harder to know exactly, where emissions are coming from. And again, there are some folks that want us to use international emissions as a reason not to be reclassified, but there's still the impact of air quality and ozone on the people that are living here. We're still breathing all of that, and we do contribute 25% to our ozone, and so reducing emissions there is going to have a positive benefit, not just for attaining, but also for the folks that live here and their immediate exposure to those pollutants.
If I can ask another question, are you VOC limited or NOx limited, or are you in that region where you have to deal with, it looks like you're in the region where you have to deal with both VOC and NOx to get ozone to respond?
Are you asking me personally, or no? Just kidding.
No, that's probably a Ralph Morris question, but.
Yeah, Ralph can answer. I can take a stab. I mean, generally, the downtown urban area, downtown Denver, is going to be VOC limited. So VOC strategies have a bigger impact. You get further out, NOx is going to be the limiting factor. So Fort Collins, Weld County. But we are seeing that transition area start getting closer to the downtown. So, really our key monitors, Rocky Flats, NREL, Chatfield, those are in the transition area where, it depends on the day. Some days it's NOx limited, some days it's VOC limited, some days it helps, some days it hurts. It's complicated here, and it's not as simple as let's just go after one or the other. It's really both, which has been the focus of, all of our strategies, is reducing both.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for those questions, and thanks for the answers. Amal is asking also, what is going on at the Welch station? It seems to run high as well. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Ralph, any thoughts?
I think that'd have to be something we'd have to get back to you on.
Okay.
Yeah, we haven't focused on that one a whole lot. It hasn't been one of our key monitors. But again, as it kind of, our ozone levels start coming in closer to the downtown as we reduce emissions, that's starting to be one of the ones that we're seeing levels go up. So yeah, we haven't really studied it, but. Sorry.
Your coming appearance from the cat. Okay, well, we can follow up on that one, and to be truthful, we're at the end of the hour. So at this point, I think I want to thank both Amanda and Jessica for the presentation. This is very, very interesting. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about it, and I got so interested that I'm going to try to come to some of the meetings that you have just to learn more about it and to see how we can all work together to come up with solutions to this difficult problem. The slides and the recording of the presentation will be available on our website. I know we had a few questions about that, so we'll put that up like probably in the next week or so. But yeah, with that, I just want to thank everyone for participating. Again, thanks to our presenters, Amanda and Jessica. And again, everybody has a lot of opportunities to participate and to be part of this process. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you all for having us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good presentation.
Thanks.